Ladies and gentlemen, let's start telling our brains that now it's time to resume the proceedings. I do apologize for the slight delay. The restaurant is quite far away. The food was great, especially that palmito salad. It was absolutely amazing, really healthy. And there is a long way to arrive to the room. So while you take your time to sit back, relax, don't sleep siesta, and that will give me time to introduce our next speaker. Most of you know him because he's quite well known in the gemology world. Wim Vertius, he's manager of field gemology at the Gemological Institute of America. He has a master's in geology. He's a GG, of course, a graduate gemologist by GIA. He's also an FGA, fellow of the Gemological Association of Great Britain. He has joined GIA in 2015 at GIA Thailand and has been doing field gemology since then. He's a great speaker. Thank you. He's a great speaker. He has a way of making very complex things simple and simple things relevant. So a big warm applause for Wim Vertius. Yes.
Let me raise this up a little bit. All right. Everyone can hear me? Everyone's still awake after an amazing lunch? Okay. Everyone's ready for a bit of a longer talk after an amazing morning? Because I want to talk to you guys about field gemology. But before we do that, I want to start with thanking everyone for being here, but especially thanking ICA and Brazil for inviting me to come here to talk about a subject that is very dear to my heart, that I'm very passionate about. I think a lot of people say that you can kind of hear that during my talks, that I care about this a lot. So that might come true over the next 30 minutes. But basically, I want to explain to everyone what field gemology is about and why we should all care about it. Now, field gemology is doing gemology in the field. But there's obviously more than that, because that would be a very short and a little bit of a disappointing talk. So what I want to explore, starting with, is why field gemology is so important for GIA, for the Gemological Institute of America, but then also take some time about why all of you, not being GIA, also should care about field gemology, because that is probably the most important thing about this whole talk. Now, to start with it, we have to start with why a laboratory like the Gemological Institute of America, why we exist. Because a gemological lab exists to answer questions from the trade. Questions from the trade. Is this this? Is this that? So the first question that was asked to gem labs, and that is still a very important question today, is what is my stone? That is still a problem, a challenge that we at GIA face daily, that people bring in a stone and ask, is this a ruby, is this a garnet? Is this a sapphire, is this an iolite? And to this day, identification is a critical part of any gem lab. The second part is that stone real? And I think we can interpret that in multiple ways. We can basically see it, did this stone come out of the ground as we see it now, or did it not come out of the ground at all? I think the whole discussion on lab-grown materials is kind of tearing the diamond industry apart right now. But that whole discussion was very relevant for colored stones in the 80s and 90s, when we saw a lot of synthetic rubies, a lot of synthetic emeralds come true. But that also includes treatment and treatment detection. Has my stone been improved a little bit after it came out of the ground? And I'm going to say a few more things specifically about treatment later on as well. But then in recent years, in the last 15 years or so, a third question was asked to gemological laboratories. Because all of a sudden, the trade started to put an enormous amount of value on the question, where is it from? The origin of a gemstone. So GIA does a lot of work on answering these questions. That's why we're here. And all these answers to those questions are in those reports that you guys are hopefully all very familiar with. Because this answers, is my stone a ruby or a garnet? Is it a natural ruby? Is it a synthetic ruby? Has it been treated? Has it not been treated? Does it come from Myanmar? Does it come from Madagascar? So all these answers are in the report, but behind that report, there is so much work that goes into it. And a lot of that work is, I think I kind of pushed the wrong button there. There we go. Okay, a lot of that work is based on research. And for me, research can be broken down into three very important components, that if you miss one of these three pillars, you can't do proper research. And the first one is you need qualified, experienced staff. You need people who know what they're working with. You need people that are familiar with gemstones, but people also familiar with the sciences that are relevant for your gemstones. For example, if you want to be a pearl researcher, it helps a lot if you have a background in marine biology. If you want to study defects in diamonds, it helps a lot to be a physicist. So you need both of that. You need that very strong academic, broader background, but also that familiarity with the trade, qualified and experienced staff. The second part is having the equipment and instruments. But more important than having it is being able to use them correctly. Every idiot with $20,000 can buy an advanced instrument and get papers with wiggly lines out of it. That doesn't mean you're actually doing science. It is knowing what those wiggly lines, those big lists of numbers mean. And that is what I mean with understanding your equipment and instruments. I would trust an experienced person with a loop over an idiot with a multi-million-dollar lab any given day. That is what it comes down to, using your instruments. But even then, if you have an army of PhDs in all the relevant sciences, and you give them billions of dollars of equipment to do research, everything they're going to be doing, every result that they'll produce is going to be useless if they don't do it on reliable samples. These reliable samples are the core foundation of doing proper research. This is the whole principle of rubbish in, rubbish out. If you start studying rubies from Mozambique and you're not even sure that these rubies are from Mozambique, you're just wasting everyone's time. That is where reliable samples come in. But what makes a collection reliable? What does that actually mean? And to explain that, I'm going to use a quote from Sir David Attenborough, who is way more respected than I am, and he just summarized it perfectly. Because in a video where he spoke about museum collections, he said the following words: where a research library associated with collections is almost of greater importance than the gemstones themselves. Unless you know where the stone came from exactly, and when it came from exactly, you're missing a lot of very, very important information. And that information does not only come from the gemstone itself, but from the circumstances of documentation that should accompany every scientifically connected specimen. What he's basically saying here is that if you have a drawer full of stones, all you have is a drawer full of stones. That is not a scientifically relevant collection. You need to know, where did I collect this? Who did I collect this from? What else did I collect there? What was this place like? How much did I pay for it? How reliable is my material? And it's that reliability. How close am I to the mine? Did I get it from the miner directly? Did I take it out of the rock myself? Did I get it from a guy whose neighbor has once been to a guy whose neighbor has been to Afghanistan, which is close to Pakistan, which means that that stone comes from Pakistan? No, that doesn't mean the same thing. Reliability, circumstances of documentation that should accompany every scientifically collected specimen. So that forms GIA's core colored stone reference collection. That is the foundation of all of our colored stone research, which is a well-documented collection where we put a lot of emphasis on how sure are we where this stone is from? Did I take my hammer, hit a rock, and a 10-carat ruby comes out? Fingers crossed that that ever happens, but we're trying really hard. Or did I get it from someone's cousin who's been to a place one time that is close to another mine? That is how reliable is the origin. And the same thing for the treatment. Did I do the treatment myself? Did I get this from someone who treated it? Did I get it from the ground directly, which means that it has never been in another human's hands, and such it has never been treated? Those are very important things to know. So for GIA, that whole collection is almost 30,000 samples, very rich in rubies and sapphires, because that is where most of our work is done. That is where most of the questions from the trade are coming from. Because remember, we're not doing this for fun. We're doing this to answer the problems that the trade has, the problems that the trade asks to GIA. Can you help this? What is my stone? Is it real? Where is it from? And most of those questions are asked about rubies, sapphires, emeralds, increasingly spinel, tourmalines, alexandrite, opal, garnets as well. So that collection is expanding in those ranges. Now to do that, GIA has done over 100 field gemology expeditions where we collected material all around the world. I don't think I have to explain the color codes, what green, red, and blue stands for. That's kind of self-explanatory. But you can see that we have visited most parts of the world where there is a lot of ruby, sapphire, and emerald production. So we have a very broad scope. So you can see that that is very important for GIA to be in the field, to be present there, to see what's out there, to collect that material. So from that point of view, we all understand why field gemology is very important for GIA. But why the hell should you guys care? What does that mean for you? Why should you, as a jeweler, a trader, a miner, a journalist, an appraiser, care about field gemology? And I think it was said this morning by Marcelo Ribeiro, who said that people don't know their gems. And I think that is why we all need to do field gemology. Because the essence of field gemology is better understanding your gems. And I think I break that down into 4 pillars. 4 pillars that we can look at them individually, but we have to look at them as a holistic thing. Because all these things, all these 4 pillars, they are part of the story of your gem. And part of the story means part of the value. And that value, that could mean a lot of different things for a lot of people. The value that GIA puts on its gem is how certain are we of its origin and its treatment. For a lot of people, that value in the stone is how beautiful is it. But that value could mean a lot of different things for a lot of people. So the first thing that we obviously need to understand is the gemstones itself. I think that speaks for itself. We can't do gemology without understanding the gemstones. And that means understanding the inclusions and the impact that inclusions can have on gemological work. That could be helping us in origin determination. That could be helping us in identification. Could be helping us in treatment detection. That is where understanding your gemstones is a very important part. But also taking it a little bit further, understanding the advanced data and the implication that that has. Understanding the chemical analysis of your stone and the implication that that has. Understanding how gemstones are actually colored. Because a lot of these things seem very simple to us, but it is actually pretty complex science about why is an emerald really green. We can give a 2-line answer to it, but we can also dedicate an entire career to studying that. So these sometimes very simple questions, understanding these gems from a very complicated, from a very unexpected angle sometimes is also part of it. And then something that is more relatable for most people is, from that gemology, is understanding your gemological nomenclature, but also being able to have that discussion. Because if we are not on the same basis, it means that if we don't all have the same understanding of gemstones, we can't have a good discussion about what really is the color of Paraíba tourmaline. How far can Paraíba range? How far can it go that direction? If we don't have a proper communal definition about what a Paraíba tourmaline is or should be or could be, we can't establish those criteria, for example. Now, the second part is the mining of gemstones. And I think the mining of gemstones, I'm going to break that down into 2 parts. Because the mining has a lot of implications. With a lot of discussions that are happening right now with sustainability, with environmental impact, I see a lot of that in the mining part. Also, the working conditions, the health impact of mining. But then there's also the geological processes at work. Understanding how the earth works and why gems are only found in certain places. For me, that is also part of understanding the mining. And it is a very exciting, but often a very overlooked part of the gemstone cycle. Because there's obviously a lot of people here who have visited gem mines, and we all know that gem mines don't look like this. It kind of would be amazing that you can go into a mine with your trusty raccoon friend and come back out with buckets full of faceted emeralds, rubies, and sapphires. But unfortunately, this is not the reality. This is not what gemstone mining looks like. Yeah, I see a lot of people going, oh damn, that would be incredible. But it is not the reality. But we have to acknowledge the reality if we want to help it improve. Because if we don't visit mines, if we don't know what the conditions in the mining is like, and I mean not only in Brazil, but more outside the world, because I think here I want to make the comment that this morning we learned that Brazil obviously is facing still a lot of challenges, but also I think that Brazil is probably one of the most mature colored stone mining industries in the whole world. So a lot of the problems that Brazil already overcame, a lot of other countries, a lot of other places are facing this. Because this is the reality in a tanzanite mine. This is where tanzanite comes from. And I turned the sound off for this one because it would be deafening. But if you see this image, I want everyone to promise me right now that you will never, ever, ever, ever complain again that tanzanite is too expensive. Because these guys work in conditions like this in 12-hour shifts for sometimes 6 months without finding a single gemstone. This is also the reality of gemstone mining. But until we face that reality, there is not a lot that we can do to improve the conditions there, to make sure that maybe they find more stones, maybe they have more efficient methods, maybe they're working in safer conditions. But this is the reality we need to acknowledge. Now, the other part of mining is acknowledging what an incredible place planet Earth is. Planet Earth, where we find all of our amazing gemstones, where all these incredible geological processes are taking place that result in all of our fantastic gemstones. Because if we understand the miracle that our gemstones really are, the natural miracle, we will gain so much more appreciation to it. Because we all get spoiled, because we look around and where the places we hang out, we see tables and trays and cabinets full of these incredible sparkly things. But we have to realize how rare these truly are, how one of a kind many of these gemstones are. And I think by understanding the geology, we can see how complex, how difficult it is to actually find gemstones. And that will also trigger our curiosity. Why are there so many gemstones in the southern and the southeastern part of Brazil and not in the central and the more western part of Brazil? Here we look at a map of the Himalayas, and we look at the tectonic setting where we see that the Indian plate smashes into the Eurasian plate and we see the Himalayan mountains form. But if I overlay this with the most important gem deposits in the region, you can see that there's a very strong correlation. Why don't we have gemstones in the Himalaya mountains? Why are the gemstones all in that western part, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and in that eastern part, southern China, northern Myanmar, northern Vietnam? These are very intriguing questions from a geological point of view that just highlight how spectacular our Earth is, how peculiar, how unusual, how remarkable the processes are that result in the gemstones that we are privileged to work with on a daily basis. Because we have to keep that in mind as well, that we are working with some of nature's most extraordinary products. Then there is the third part, and that is the trading. And I had a whole list here, all these notes prepared, but actually everything I wanted to say has been summarized by Gaetano Cavalieri this morning in one line, where he said that a single jewelry product represents the work and skill of thousands of people. That is what I mean with try to understand the trading. Try to understand the journey that your stone has been to. And that is often a very complex thing, because a lot of these supply chains are very opaque. If we want to know what happened to a gemstone after it is cut, basically the whole jewelry manufacturing process, there are libraries dedicated to it. But if you want to understand the journey of a stone, how it came out of the ground somewhere and ended up in someone's hand and moved to a different continent and was turned into a faceted stone and then was traded in a wholesale market, there is no information available about that. And that is where a lot of the interesting things are happening. So I think that is where we need to understand the trading a lot better. How do stones move from point A to point B? And what is the value created throughout that? What is the skill required to it? Because the journey of a lot of sapphires that we see on Place Vendôme in Fifth Avenue start right here in a buying office in the middle of the desert of southern Madagascar in a place called Ilakaka, where this guy, armed with a 10x visor that is patched up with duct tape and a loop with flimsy batteries, with a torch with flimsy batteries and a cup of water, he is laying the foundation for what we will later call extremely fine jewelry. The skill that these people have in making those decisions in those conditions of valuing that material, I challenge everyone here to sit in that chair for 10 minutes and come out as a sane person. Because it is extreme amount of pressure, it is an extreme amount of skill to make these decisions there that could influence tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Another part of understanding how stones move from point A to point B is understanding where value is added. Why does a stone come out of the ground worth $10 in Tanzania and sells for $10,000 in Paris? Where does all that value come from? Who made money on it, and where does the increases happen? And I think this is where I want to go back to that treatment that I said in the beginning, where I think that we should talk about understanding value addition. Because if we look at gemstones, and those of you that are familiar with mining, it would be incredible that all you get out of a mine is gem quality material. But that is not the reality. Here we are looking at production from a sapphire mine in Thailand, and we can see that there's about 5% of the production in terms of weight that is actually nice as it is. These are nice blue stones. But what are you going to do with the rest of it? Because if there's one thing that's become clear in the last years, it is that you can't run a system for the 1% alone. You need to be able to create value with all these other products, with the material in the back. And a very easy way to create value with it is to prove it with heat treatment or other kinds of treatments. Because we have to keep in mind the most important thing about a gemstone, and this is something that is the most simple thing but is very often forgotten, is it pretty? And treatment can help you make a lot of stones look pretty that weren't pretty the way they came out of the ground. We'll make them more attractive, we'll find them a buyer. Obviously losing a bit of a premium, but they're still able to make some money with it to turn that around. So treatment is one way to upgrade lower grade material. So I'm going to make some very strong statements here. Feel free to fight me on it. But I think treatment allows us to utilize way more rough gems. And because we are able to use more rough gems, we have a higher percentage to find the finer materials. I think one rough dealer explained it to me. If you don't have a market for the 50 kilograms of brownish garnet, you are never going to find the 10-carat ruby. That is what it is about. You need to be able to move the material that is not highly desirable the way it comes out of the ground, make it more desirable. Another way is that treatment provides us with a range of gems in different price categories. Ideally, we would all be decked out with priceless, flawless gemstones, but unfortunately, my wallet doesn't allow for that. I can only afford a heat-treated sapphire because the premium for a treated stone, I cannot afford that. Does that mean that I'm not worthy of a sapphire? No, there is a sapphire in my range, and treatment allows for that. So I'm going to say here that treatment is necessary. Treatment keeps the gemstone supply chain alive, and treatment is the reason why we will all still have a job in 50 years. Now, the next part is that we have to acknowledge that rarity is a very important factor for gemstones, which means that untreated gemstones are a lot rarer than treated gemstones, which means we have to be very open about that. On top of that, certain gemstones can reduce the durability or require special care. If you have a heavily oiled emerald, don't do the dishes with it because the oil will go out and it will not look as pretty as before. So that is why disclosure is the most important thing. Undisclosed treatment is not acceptable. Undisclosed treatment might be the reason why we're all out of a job in 50 years. Treatment is the reason why we'll still be here. Undisclosed treatment might be the reason why we won't be here. And then I add another small line that ignorance is no excuse. In a day like today, you can't say, I didn't know. That doesn't work for us anymore. We are all adults. We are all highly trained. We all need to understand this is the impact that treatment can have and be very open, be very transparent about that. Let's move on to the last part, and that is the source. Understanding the place where a stone comes from is very important. The people that work with them, the meaning that stones hold for them. What do these places look like? Because I think that adds so much value to your stone, so much of what Marcelo mentioned, the story of your gemstone, that we need to know that. All these facts that were listed here about the Belmont mine, protecting the Atlantic forest, renewable energy, things like that, but also more complex issues around these sources. Because if we understand what these stones mean for these people, for the people that work with them, we will appreciate the value for it. If you're not a fan of emeralds, I challenge everyone to talk to Marcelo and his team for 5 minutes, and emeralds will be your favorite stone. If you're not a big fan of blue sapphires, talk to any of the Sri Lankans here, and in 5 minutes, blue sapphires will be your favorite stone. That is what understanding the source is about. But it's also sometimes a little bit more complex, and it has a little bit of an ugly side. We have to acknowledge that. For example, understanding the source is also understanding what it means for supply. Right now, there is a heavily armed conflict going on the border of Pakistan and India, which resulted in a ban of gemstones from Pakistan. Pakistan, which is probably in the top 5 of producing gemstone areas in the world. What does that mean if one of the top 5 players is not allowed to play anymore? What does it mean that Eastern Congo is completely under control of a militia that is not interested in tourmaline mining, where we can say that Eastern Congo is probably responsible for about 20% of the green and pink tourmaline coming in the market today? What does it mean that the Australian government changes a law that you can no longer apply for mining licenses in a cattle farm? Understanding all of these things is very important to understand the full story about your gemstone. Because I did the test where I went to a high jewelry brand that I shall not name, where I asked them, can I please see a Burmese ruby? Where they said, I'm sorry, sir, we don't deal in Burmese rubies. And when I asked why, I got the answer, ugh. That is not a good look on anyone. If you don't know what you're talking about, if you don't know why you make certain choices, that is a client lost straight away. There is nothing wrong with not knowing the answer. There is everything wrong with not acknowledging the question. I'm not telling you that you need to know the answers. I'm just telling you that you need to ask the questions about all these things. Is it okay to work with this product? Do I think it is okay? Because maybe you think something very different about it. Maybe we have very different opinions. But at least we've acknowledged that it is worth having a discussion about certain materials. I think a big example we can have right now, what do we do with Russian diamonds? That is a big question right now. But I think, in summary, I think we all understand now that field gemology is more than just visiting mines. It is more than taking a refractometer outside and taking an RI in the field. It is about understanding everything that goes on there. Field gemology is trying to catch the experience, what makes a gem truly special. I can tell you that Thai food is really spicy, but until you felt the burn of the chili, you don't know what I'm talking about. I can tell you that Brazilians throw the best parties, but until you've danced at Carnival with a caipirinha in your hand, you don't know what I'm talking about. I can tell you that this gem is really unique, but until you've looked at the whole field gemology around it, you don't know what that means. So I think that is really what field gemology is all about. Field gemology is about seeing everything around your gemstone. It is not just focusing on the tree, not only on the sparkling rock. It is focusing on everything that surrounds that gemstone. It is about tasting the spicy food. It is about dancing at the carnival. It is about what gives you goosebumps when you look at certain stones. That is the essence of field gemology. Because if we understand the value of our stones, if we understand the story behind it, that story is an incredible part of that value. So if we understand that story, that surrounding a lot better, we will automatically value our gemstones a lot more correct, in my opinion. Higher or lower, that doesn't matter. More correct is what it is about. So for me, field gemology is understanding that connection between the mining, the trading, the source, and the gems. It is understanding that your stone formed in incredible processes here on Earth, that it is handled by countless experts who put years, generations of expertise in it. It is understanding that it comes from a place where it has left a mark, where it has made an impact. So I think that is why we do field gemology. That is why we do field gemology. That's why you should do field gemology. And I hope you guys learned something about this, got a little bit inspired to ask more questions. And with that, I want to thank you all for listening. If there are any questions, we'll be very happy to discuss more of them. But I don't know if we have the time to do that right now. We don't. So we'll do that later. Thank you.
Can you turn on? Oh, the microphone is on. Just for you to know, because you mentioned that if you don't dance the carnival, you don't understand the culture, we will have carnival dancing tonight to understand better the Brazilian gemstones. So very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wim.